Hello and welcome to the Hibs Observer morning briefing. Myself, Patrick McPartlin, joined by Liam Bryce, as always, to discuss the latest news coming out of Easter Road. It has been the international break, so not a great deal going on, but still two or three topics that I think probably warrant a bit of debate and discussion before we get back to domestic action on Saturday at Dens Park. So I think, Liam, probably the biggest kind of bit of news this week was Nick Montgomery's comments about Paul Hanlon and Stevenson. Obviously, the pair of them haven't played that much under him since he came in. I think it's a handful of starts each and a couple of appearances off the bench. There has been games where they've not been used at all. But the suggestions from the manager seem to be that both of them still have a role to play in his squad. What did you make of his comments about sort of blending youth and experience in his squad and the role that the two of them can still play?
Yeah, I think it's probably what you'd expect from a manager who's probably to an extent maybe still, just sussing out exactly what he wants going forward, exactly what he thinks he needs. He's obviously come in sort of middle of September. He's had a couple of months to kind of oversee everything, make judgments on players without maybe, coming to every firm conclusion that he's going to. I mean, obviously, he was a wee bit non-committal about it, wasn't he? But I think when it comes to contracts and stuff, managers tend to be like that unless things are much further on behind the scenes than they want to let on. But I think it's it's no surprise that he's talking about the kind of consummate professionalism of Hanlon and Stevenson. I don't think anybody will be shocked by that. That's kind of they've kind of built their reputation on not only being good players but being kind of model pros who are used as examples for young players coming through at the club. So I mean, it'll be interesting to see how it develops. I think there's obviously quite a few decisions to be made on contracts. And I think both will have a part to play from now to the end of the season. I mean, it's not Hibs have not a great deal of depth in the sort of defensive areas, especially kind of centre back. You think that's maybe something that they'll look to address in January. But I certainly think guys of such experience are not going to play every week now. I think especially maybe Lewis Stevenson, considering Jordan Abita's kind of made that left back role his own, but they will still contribute, I think, and then obviously they will kind of bring valuable experience to the squad. I think actually we did a piece earlier on in the week looking at who was adding sort of most value with their performances to the Hibs squad this season. It was just a methodology on StatsBomb that we use, and it just kind of judges the value of every action that a player makes on the pitch. And we kind of obviously we filtered that a wee bit to really just kind of include the players who played the most minutes, because small sort of sample sizes can sort of skew things to an extent. So it was players that had only played like kind of 600 minutes or more, which kind of drilled down into the sort of core who have started most games this season. But it was interesting, and I probably should have put this in a piece actually, but if you dialed it back a wee bit, and not to a kind of silly extent of guys who'd only played maybe 15, 20 minutes here or there, it was still kind of over 200, 300 minutes that actually Paul Hanlon was kind of up there in terms of sort of the value that he was adding in his kind of sort of limited performance appearances so far. So I mean, just from that kind of metric alone, it kind of shows you that the likes of himself and Stevenson still have something to offer. I know he took a bit of criticism at times, Hanlon, for a couple of performances earlier this season, but to have guys like that still in and around the place, especially when you're trying to bring young players through as well. There's a couple of 16, 17-year-olds in the squad. They need that kind of influence, guys that they can look up to. So whether kind of one or both of them will still be around come next season, I think it's hard to say, because it could come down to like where they kind of see themselves. They are sort of coming towards the the kind of latter stages of their career now. Obviously, we know Paul Hanlon, he kind of graduated with a degree recently. He's obviously thinking about life after football. The kind of possibility of coaching roles and everything is obviously there as well. So, I mean, it probably, when you've got that kind of much, respect at the club, I think there will be an element of, what do they fancy doing? Do they want to stick around in some capacity, or do they want to continue their playing career elsewhere? Because I know it kind of can get to that stage if guys are kind of getting well into their 30s, but they want to keep playing. Sometimes the club won't hold them back if they want to go and maybe try and play regular week-to-week football elsewhere that they might not get at Hibs. So, I mean, it's all kind of still very much up in the air at the moment, but it's, as far as what Nick Montgomery said about it, I think it's kind of what you'd expect him to say, and I do think they'll probably be in and out of the team between now and the end of the season.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting topic because I think there's quite a few things at play here. One is you've obviously got the fact that they have been around the squad for a long time. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I think if you look back over the last, even going back to the sort of Scottish Cup final season, obviously the pair of them have contributed a lot. I think they're the kind of players who they're going to most weeks give you a sort of solid 7 out of 10, and I think you need players like that in your squad. I think Neil Warnock actually said something very similar to you about Nick Montgomery when he was a player in his Sheffield United squad. About he's never going to be he was never a 5 out of 10, never a 9 out of 10, but he was always like a 7 out of 10.
Between. Yep.
And I think you get that from Hanlon and Stevenson most times they play. I mean, we're not saying they're perfect, not saying that they don't have a mistake in them, because I think they do. If they didn't, they wouldn't be at Hibs, or they wouldn't have spent so long at Hibs. But I think it's interesting to think that certainly at Central Coast Mariners, Montgomery developed a bit of a reputation for moving on players who have maybe been in and around the squad a little bit too long. I think he's there's maybe a little bit of ruthlessness in there, for the sort of greater good of the team. And I think it's about striking a balance. If you've got players who won't be able to contribute in the way that the manager wants them to in his style of play. So, for Montgomery, that's that sort of, his pressing game, that sort of fluid 4-4-2 formation. And I think like I certainly would agree with you that I think, we will see them in and out of the team between now and the end of the current campaign. I don't think Hibs would be going into a new season with the two of them as certainly not as starters. And I think this might be the first summer where we might see, for the first time in, well, probably for as long as we can remember, that there is some sort of doubt over whether they're going to be heavily involved in the senior squad. I think, my gut feeling would be that the reliability and that sort of 7 out of 10 characteristic that they both have is probably, it's been good for Hibs, but it's also been detrimental because, you speak to fans about the centre backs and the defence. You look at how they were playing at the start of the season when they had those that sort of run of 3 losses in sort of first 3 games of the season, the first 3 league games, and I think it's problematic because Hibs shouldn't have a defence that still at the start of the season anyway was relying on Lewis Stevenson at left back and Paul Hanlon at centre back. Now that's not to take anything away from them. It's not to say they they're past it, or they still don't have something to offer, because they both do. But I think their reliability and their consistency over the years has probably sort of like held Hibs back from bringing in more in defence. I know we've seen Rocky Bashiri come in, you've seen Will Fish. Riley Harbottle obviously arrived in the summer, but hasn't really been seen much recently. I think he's only been on the bench a handful of times under Montgomery, which I think possibly tells its own story about where they see him in terms of readiness for first team football. So I think you do have this situation where will you be starting them every week? No. Could they still do a job? Probably. And I think when you consider that Hibs don't have a great deal of strength and depth, I think having the two of them to call upon from the bench, even knowing that you've got reliable guys who get the squad, who have shown they can play the style of sort of football that Montgomery wants from them is probably going to be beneficial. But this does feel like the time that, I mean, certainly with both of them out of contract in the summer, you can maybe see the two of them getting maybe like another 12 months offer each, possibly. This isn't inside information. This is just me speculating here, just to clarify before anyone starts keeping receipts for future. But it wouldn't be the daftest thing, I think, to try and keep them on sort of 12-month contracts, just to have them around to help sort of bring through some of those academy youngsters that you're talking about, and just to have them there, to call upon. I mean, they've obviously done their coaching badges as well. You can get them involved with the, some of the academy teams as well, and that's that's going to be beneficial. But I think certainly it'll be interesting to see what the coaching staff decide to do with them this summer. With them being out of contract, I mean, there's quite a few boys out of contract, as we discussed. And Nick Montgomery has been very consistent in kind of batting the questions away during press conferences and suggesting that it's that's for later down the line. So maybe there's an element of waiting to see a bit more from them over the course of the season before making a decision. But I mean, my take on it would be that I don't think either of them are finished. Whether or not they've got a future at Hibs as sort of regular first teamers, I think is probably a bit up in the air. And whilst that might be quite difficult for a lot of diehard Hibbies to come to terms with, because they've kind of been part of the furniture for so long, Lewis Stevenson especially, I don't think you can afford to have too much room for sentiment. And I think ultimately that's what it's going to boil down to, when it comes to this summer. So certainly one to keep an eye on. I'm sure they'll both be used, quite a lot between now and the end of the season. And as you were saying, the stats are showing that they both still got a lot to offer. So yeah, I think an interesting one to keep our eyes on until the summer.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's maybe a sort of broader issue that we'll maybe touch a bit on this later on as well. And just in terms of, I think the average age of the squad is sort of creeping up a bit at the moment. And I mean, that if it's something that Nick Montgomery wants to bring down going forward, because I think just, it's something clubs try to avoid, I think, in general, especially when, you are kind of looking to be a club who perhaps develops players and then as part of your model at some point will maybe sell them on for a decent amount of money, to have, too many players who are getting, into their 30s, can get into the sort of wrong end. It's kind of depressing talking about that now when I'm in my 30s as well. Used to be able to comment on things like that as a youngster.
I think you were a youngster this past sort of month, so I think you're all right.
I know, still clinging on. But I think that there are quite a few kind of senior players in the squad now. You obviously look at Hanlon and Stevenson. You've got David Marshall, Adam Lafondra. Who else have we got? Christian Dodge is 31 now. Even Martin Boyle is going to be 31 next year, which kind of seems a bit hard to comprehend. Yeah, maybe something to do with that. So I think that's going to come into it as well. I think there's going to be decisions. I think some of them might take care of themselves in terms of guys who might end up calling time, or who just kind of naturally end up moving on. But I certainly think that will come into it as well, because I think Nick Montgomery will want to bring the average age of the squad down. I know there's a kind of couple of, I think the sort of youngest average age lineup this season was the kind of away game at St Mirren, and I think that was only because Rory Whittaker started, and he's 16, so he dragged that down quite considerably. So I think there will be an element of that going forward. Whether Hanlon and Stevenson, that affects what happens with them, I don't know, but I think it's maybe an issue that's going to maybe come to the fore a wee bit over the next couple of months. I think certainly in the January market, if Nick Montgomery's looking for players, that I wouldn't be surprised to see them start looking towards that kind of early 20s, guys who can come in and immediately make an impact. It's not, kind of teenagers who are, going to be kind of bedded in over a long period of time. But in terms of adding more senior players to the squad, I don't know. I mean, I could be completely wrong here, but I do think that it will be something we'll see Hibs kind of look to, kind of bring that balance of youth and experience, kind of redress that towards the middle a wee bit, I think.
Yeah, I think you've got a point there. I mean, I think you think back to when Lee Johnson was in charge and he had his 4-8-8-4 model in terms of his ideal squad, which was sort of 4 players, kind of, I think 17, 18. Then you had 8 in that sort of, I think there were, what was it, assets or something like that. So they were sort of, 19, 20 to 24, 25. You then had players in their peak, which was another 8 from like 25 to 30. And then you had your sort of experienced players, which was kind of 31 plus. And obviously you wanted 4 in that slot. But I mean, you can sort of see the science and the logic behind that in terms of having, a squad that's made up of a mixture of personalities and a mixture of experience and ability, because that's maybe how you try and get as well-rounded a squad as you can. But it's, football isn't perfect. It isn't Football Manager in real life, and I think it is very difficult to say, right, well, we'll sign this player because he fits the model, but this player doesn't, even if the second player, if he's the wrong age profile, but might actually be the better signing. I don't think you can really operate on that level. So I think one of the other things that would be taken into consideration is Brian McDermott and the contacts he will have. I mean, I think if you look at the moment, you mentioned about bringing the average age of the squad down, but if you're playing Rocky Bashiri and Will Fish, then that's a centre-back pairing that has, quite a young combined age. I think Rocky's 23 and Fish is still 20. So that's an average. That's a centre-back pairing with a combined age that isn't that much more than like David Marshall or Adam Lafondra. And I really hope they're not listening, because that wasn't a slight on either. But I think that it illustrates just how sort of young the defence is when it doesn't have, for example, like Paul Hanlon in it, which goes back to what we said before about having a defender who's got that experience, because I think you're going to make mistakes, and you're a young centre back. We saw Will Fish at times last season, especially when he first came into the squad, and I think again at the start of this season. Rocky on occasion as well. They're still young. Neither of them have played a great deal of football in their careers so far. But they need to be allowed to make the mistakes, but they also need to benefit from having someone alongside them or in training who can help them kind of get over these mistakes, who they can go to and say, what should I do in this situation? How would you deal with that? And I think it goes back to having Darren McGregor in and around the squad last season, and obviously David Gray and the coaching staff, people who've been there and done it, not just in football but at Hibs. And I think that's really sort of important, just to have those sort of figures around. I think there was a time when there maybe weren't enough figures like that at Hibs, whether that was by design or whether it was deliberate, I don't know. But you had a lot of people who didn't really have that connection to the club, and it felt like there was something missing. But now you've still got Hanlon and Stevenson around, you've still got David Gray around, you've got Gareth Evans heading up the academy, you've got Darren McGregor and Guillaume Bouzlin taking the sort of youth teams. You've even got sort of staff behind the scenes, like Tommy Scanlon, Rory Monks, and sort of sports science and physiotherapy department, who've come back after being away. And I think just having that mix of experience in the squad, but also having a mix of people who get the club, who know the club inside out, with sort of newcomers, it's probably the best way of ensuring that anyone who is coming in is getting a good grounding in what the club's about, what the fans expect. So yeah, I think there are a lot of arguments for keeping them around beyond the summer. There's probably also arguments for kind of not being sentimental and just kind of moving them on either into sort of non-playing capacity, or I mean, I don't know whether either of them would be able to see themselves playing at another club at this stage of their career. So yeah, I think something to look out for at the start of next year. Something else that might be come to the forefront early in 2024 is whether or not Hibs are going to have a safe standing section. Obviously, this has been on the table for quite some time. I think back in 2011 was when the SPL as was kind of gave the green light for pilot schemes to for clubs to look at trials for safe standing after obviously the post Hillsborough having a need for every stadium to be all seated. I think it was last week they put out this consultation just asking fans for their thoughts and their views. They've already been speaking to fans, I think in person and in previous consultations about moving the singing section from the East Stand to the famous 5 stand. And it looks like the safe standing has sort of developed from that. Is that something you broadly be in favour of? You think that would sort of ramp up the atmosphere at Easter Road, Liam?
Yeah, I'm in favour of it. Yeah, I do like it as a concept. I think it adds a lot. I think it's just kind of obviously the example that everybody points to is the yellow wall at Borussia Dortmund. It's the kind of standard. I mean, I'm not quite expecting exactly the same thing to arrive in Scotland at any point soon, but I think broadly the concept, what it adds, is certainly worth exploring. Obviously, the example everybody kind of looks to here is it's obviously been in place at Celtic Park for a long time. I think the safe standing concept there has broadly been a success. It's popular with fans, and you can say that it certainly does help add to the atmosphere. And I just think it's something that a lot of fans are clearly in favour of. It's something that a lot of fans, I think, would like to see, and it's good, obviously, when you see clubs engaging with supporters over things like this. Because I think it's just fans just want to have the sort of best possible experience when they go to a game, and I think Hibs have been quite good at implementing a lot of things to try and maximise that for supporters, and it feels like a kind of logical next step to at least start consulting over it, kind of taking in views. I mean, obviously, I don't speak for the entire Hibs fan base, of course, but I do feel like it is probably something that a lot of people would be in favour of, and I'm kind of broadly supportive of the concept as well. I do quite like it, and I think it adds quite a lot to the atmosphere at games.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly was. I mean, I can remember speaking to Ron Gordon about this back in, I think, September 2021, and he was really, really kind of, I mean, as we were talking about managers, it's the same with executive chairmen, club owners, whatever. I just said chairmen, then executive chairmen, club owners, whoever. That there can be a level of sort of, they are sometimes non-committal about these things, but I think part of his wider plans to improve the overall matchday experience at Easter Road, Ron was really kind of adamant that safe standing was something they wanted to explore. It was on the list. It was I think it was felt that it was something the fans wanted. There was, as you were saying there's a lot of sort of appetite for it, and I certainly think when you consider what else they've done to Easter Road to change it up and just change the matchday experience for the better. You've got the big screens, you've got the LED advertising boards, you've got the the overhaul in hospitality, which I think is the streets ahead of what it was. Obviously they've changed some of the big badges down by the dugouts. They've relayed the pitch. They've got the big sort of UEFA compliant lights now, and it sort of does feel like maybe the last piece of the jigsaw would be sort of investigating the viability of having a standing section. Obviously, they've done trials previously with the singing section, moving them to the famous 5 lower for the UEFA Youth League games last season, and I think for some of the European games earlier this year. And I think it does. Again, you mentioned Borussia Dortmund. I think Germany in general, you look at games, you see games on TV, and it's not just Germany; it's other countries as well. But Germany does seem to be the kind of this sort of seem to be the benchmark for this sort of thing, and it certainly does add to the atmosphere. And more often than not, there is a lot of noise and activity and colour behind the goals, and it does. I think you speak to players, in any of these countries, and I think they would say it does make a difference, sort of having having the sort of supporters in that position, sort of willing you on to win, and certainly the sort of under 19 spoke about it very favourably when they were playing their youth league games at Easter Road, and the sort of the difference it made to them. And it seems logical to suggest, well, if it made a difference in a youth league game, then it would certainly make a difference in a Scottish Premiership game, a Scottish Cup game, a European game. And I think it's certainly interesting to see Hibs sort of continuing to engage with fans on this, whether it's the singing section element and moving them from the East to the famous five, or whether it's looking at a standing section. I think the problem they have is that obviously you've got season ticket holders in the famous five lower who might be happy standing but not wanting to be part of a singing section, or individuals who might not be happy standing or being part of the singing section, and so obviously that has to be taken into consideration. But I think, I wrote about this earlier this week, and I said this in the article, that we don't really have a sort of end date for this. There's no sort of time frame in place, which I'm sure is deliberate on Hibs' part. But it wouldn't surprise me if, given when season tickets went on sale for the current season this year, which I think was towards the end of February, I wouldn't be surprised if they've sort of made a decision by then, if they've been able to kind of reach a conclusion about whether or not there will be a standing section. And if that's the case, then again, this was something else I said in the piece that would I think it would suggest that it could be done by probably the summer. And I think that would be quite interesting, is to do this consultation, to speak to the fans, and then to be able to turn it around as quickly as that, rather than it taking sort of like a long period of time, and fans sort of like becoming a bit disengaged and things like that. So again, something else to keep an eye on. I think I wouldn't be surprised if we do hear more on this in the not too distant future. So we'll certainly keep an eye out for that. I think, just to wrap up, the sort of Hibs talking points from this week would be Kevin Van Veen, who's issued the classic come and get me plea to Scottish clubs ahead of the January transfer window. Obviously, a little bit of a rift with his manager at Groningen, Dick Luckian, has held his hands up and said that he maybe said something he shouldn't have.
I really want to know what he said.
I know, we all do. We can. I think we can only guess at this stage, but there are obviously personal reasons behind it as well, for him. And I think he's spoken about coming back. He was certainly hot property in the summer because everyone knew he was leaving Motherwell, and I think it was suggested at the time that maybe Hibs should be looking at him. But then again, you mentioned this earlier, the sort of age profile. Is he maybe, if Hibs still see themselves as a selling team, is he too old for bringing in on what would probably be premium wages, and then not really having a sell-on value? But you also look at the goals he scored last season and think that's something that can't really be sniffed at. But you looked at this earlier this week. You sort of crunched the numbers in StatsBomb just to sort of see what he could bring to Hibs. We're not suggesting for a moment here that Brian McDermott's currently in the Netherlands with a big checkbook. That's not what we're saying at all. But obviously, it's a transfer that previously a lot of fans were, I think, interested in, and obviously if he's coming back to Scotland, you'd imagine that Hibs may be one of the teams that might be able to to sort of have him for half a season. But you looked at the stats, you looked at the numbers. What could he bring to Hibs if they were interested?
Well, obviously the obvious. I was going to say the obvious thing is goals. It's a difficult one. Again, we're not. This is it's kind of purely speculative. The moment it's clearly a talking point when a player who scored 29 goals in the Scottish Premiership last season, across all competitions last season, becomes available and attainable to clubs outside of Celtic and Rangers. It's a kind of difficult one because you'd think, kind of stripped of a lot of context, 29 goals, last season, you'd think, well, that's an absolutely no-brainer. My team should be interested in bringing this guy in. But there is kind of considerable context to it. There are a lot of things to consider. The first one is obviously he's his age. He's 32 now. Van Veen. Again, do Hibs need another senior striker in the squad who, as you say, kind of no real sell-on value. He's not going to play for peanuts. Van Veen, he's probably obviously moved out to Groningen. That's probably earned him a bit more of a payday than he was getting at Motherwell. I think he was quite open about that as well. He was coming at the end of his career. If he could get another sort of bigger move, financial terms anyway, he was certainly open to that. So it's a difficult one because a lot of his, you look at his goals, you think, well, even if he's not playing every single week, that's a player who could bring considerable value to your squad, and a system as well that does require two strikers. You want to have as many options there as possible. He's kind of more than just a kind of come on to in a moment that he is more than just a goal scorer as well. He did bring a lot to Motherwell last season. I suppose the obvious question is, 29 goals, was that, a guy on an incredible hot streak? He scored a lot of goals kind of earlier in his career in the sort of, but it was the kind of very lower levels of Dutch football. Then he went to England, and it's a kind of difficult one to kind of, fathom out because he was playing for a few sides who, they were not good teams, really. A lot of teams who were struggling, and obviously not scoring many goals in general. Kind of good when he came up to Motherwell at first, and then obviously last season he completely exploded again in a team that was for a significant chunk of last season. I remember thinking Motherwell had the look of relegation about them. He kind of looked in a bit of a spiral at one point, but he continued scoring goals through that. And just in terms of whether would he be able to replicate that, I think when you kind of drill down into the his stats from last season, it wasn't a case of him scoring a lot of unlikely goals. When a player goes on a streak where it's from whatever position they're in the park, no matter how good a chance it seems to fly into the net. There wasn't a lot of kind of sort of low quality or kind of low expected goals opportunities that he was somehow managing to put into the net. The kind of, when you looked at the goals and the kind of level of sort of the quality of the chance, it basically was, if you created a good chance for him, he was going to put it away. He was a kind of very reliable finisher of good chances. So it was, it wasn't a kind of great suggestion that he was just a guy who had hit this incredible hot streak where absolutely everything he was hitting was getting into the back of the net.
Mm-hmm.
So that suggests that he probably could be relied on to provide goals. I think before he told his manager where to go at Groningen, he was on a goal every other game, which again suggests that he's continued from last season. He was obviously up for Player of the Year in a number of categories last year. Just in terms of his creative output as well, I think he made sort of 38 key passes across the season, which is basically just a pass that then leads to the team having a shot, which was was comparable. It was in the same sort of ballpark as kind of other guys who were up for the Player of the Year award. You're talking, kind of Rio Hatate, Callum McGregor, Malik Tillman at Rangers. So he brought a lot more to Motherwell than just goals. He was just the main man basically. But then there is obviously the fact that he is kind of getting on a bit in years. Maybe starting to come to that stage of his career where he might end up slowing down a wee bit. Would be a bit of a risk in those terms. And then it's just, I suppose it comes down to the fact, do Hibs really need another striker? Because obviously Elias Melkerson is coming back. He's a kind of a young guy who's coming back, obviously looking for chances in the first team. Nick Montgomery's expressed an interest in, I'm going to use, he's got a part to play, suggesting he's going to use him. I think I know circumstances change, and in football, clubs have got to be ruthless when good opportunities come along. But how would it look to him, really, if he's coming back to Hibs looking for a chance, and then in January, Hibs go out and sign another striker? And I think if there's not a lot of money to play with in the January transfer window, then as that money, perhaps is there a greater need area in other areas of the squad? Obviously, we talked about um, the centre back position. Hibs are a wee bit light there. Should that be the priority? Maybe some guys are going to have to move on as well. So I think with Van Veen, on paper, a 29 goal striker, you'd be kind of like, how do we, can a club really turn their nose up at that? But I just don't know if the timing is quite right for us, just all the kind of factors I've mentioned before, and the fact that they'd be bringing in another senior player to the squad who isn't going to, there's no kind of resale value. It's would he be interested in a short-term contract? I don't know. It's a difficult one because you can pick out reasons for and against, and I think that's why we had a very mixed reaction to it. I felt like most people seem to be like emphatically yes, get this guy in, or emphatically no, not interested whatsoever. There was no sort of middle ground, so I suppose it at least tells us it was a good talking point.
Yeah, well, he certainly ticked the box in that sense. I think, I suppose my take on it would be that when you consider what Hibs have in attack, if they're playing the way that Montgomery wants to play, with sort of two centre forwards, two wingers who can interchange with, one of the centre forwards dropping deep. You've obviously got Eli Yuan, you've got Martin Boyle, you've got Jair Tavares who can play out wide. Up front, you've got, at the moment, Christian Doidge is coming back. You've got Dylan Venter. You've got, Adam Lafondra once he's fit again. You've also got, as you mentioned, Elias Melkerson coming back. You've also got Harry McCurdy, who obviously is still some way away from sort of returning to action. But it's certainly, there was a time when I think you could argue Hibs didn't really have a lot in the final third. But at the moment, I think they do. If they did bring in Van Veen, that would be an awful lot of kind of maybe out-and-out strikers. And I think really, if they are going to be bringing anything in the final third, I think you'd have to say it's got to be a winger. I think we've seen with the way they've been playing recently that Montgomery has had to adapt his 4-4-2 to slightly different setups to kind of accommodate players being able to play in that sort of setup, but not quite in the positions that previously he's used. So you look at Josh Campbell coming in. Obviously, Josh Campbell's not a winger, but he was using him as a sort of almost as a sort of number 10 alongside Tavares, and I think he had Dylan Vente, Martin Boyle up top. So you want players who you can sort of have that flexibility to play in a number of positions. But yeah, I mean, for me, final third, you need wingers, you need wide options. I think it says a lot that when Rory Whittaker was coming on for his debut, he was playing further up the park than he would normally, because he's a right back, or tends to play there was playing there for the under-18s, and obviously these days players are very versatile. They can play a number of positions, but I think that sort of tells you probably just how kind of stretched Hibs are for options in the wide areas. And again, you look at how many goals they're scoring and how many goals they're conceding. You think the problem is not in front of goal. The problem is, in defence. Whether that's, the full backs, centre backs, whether it's protecting them from midfield. But yeah, I think I'm the same as you. You can see having a 29 goal striker sort of available would be, potentially bite your hand off territory. But you look at his scoring record so far this season for Groningen, who are currently playing in the second tier in the Netherlands, which is what Dylan Vente was doing before Hibs signed him. And, the difference obviously is here's a player closer to the start of his career than Van Veen, who, will have a sell-on value, who I think if he, continues his sort of goal-scoring streak or his goal-scoring form for Hibs over the course of this season, maybe next season, there is going to be interest. From bigger clubs, because what club doesn't want a sort of up and coming goal scorer who you can rely on, who can do all the things that Bent is doing. So yeah, I think for me it's maybe in the summer before before sort of signings were made, before Adam Lafondra, for instance, was brought in. Here was somebody who might have been worth a shout. Obviously knows the league, can play. You say can play as a centre forward, but he can bring other players into it. He's got that creative streak. But yeah, I think if I was the recruitment team at Easter Road, I'd be looking at other areas of the squad before centre forward. And it's I think Montgomery and McDermott and the sort of scouting team, the recruitment team will be doing that. I think they'll be looking at what badly needs sorted. And I think, as I said, you've got to have a look at wide options in there, possibly something in central defence. That certainly seems to be the sort of key areas that you would need filled before going to the before looking for another centre forward. So perhaps the case of like an interesting player, but not the right time. Maybe that boat has sailed. But we look forward to what Hibs will end up doing in January. Brian McDermott said at an event last month saying that they expected it to be kind of more of a reactive window. So maybe not necessarily going out and sort of bringing in sort of 4 or 5, 6 signings, but sort of waiting to see what happens with other players in the squad. I mean, there are a lot of players in that squad. I mean, it's a question someone's put. I mean, obviously this is a wider topic for another video, asking what we think will happen with the likes of Dylan Tate and Dan Mackay in January. I mean, that's a whole other discussion. But there's 10 players out on loan at the moment. Obviously, the squad isn't the biggest, that Nick Montgomery has at his disposal. But if you are going to be bringing players in, then the suggestion is players are going to have to move on as well. So I think January could be an interesting month. I don't think there's any doubt that Hibs will maybe need 1 or 2 incomings. Although obviously I know that with the players who are out injured at the moment, you'll have McCurdy back, you'll have Chris Cadden coming back as well. You'll have Adam Lafondra back. So I think there's a couple of those players who I think Montgomery has actually said will be like new signings. But yeah, I think given what Hibs have at their disposal at the moment, and the other areas of the team that need surgery before up top, I think we can probably be fairly confident in saying it'd be surprising if he was on the radar. I mean, obviously, this could come back to haunt me. And
welcome to Hibs, Kevin Van Veen.
Yeah, bookmark this. What is it? 42 minutes, 55 seconds in. I'll hold my hands up. If that happens, I will hold my hands up. But I think, all joking aside, looking at the state of the squad at the moment and what it needs, what it would benefit from, I would be surprised. I think it would be the best way of putting it. But let's wait and see. Thank you for joining us this morning. We'll be back probably sometime next week to have a look back at the game at the weekend. Hibs on the road at Dundee, hoping for another 3 points, building on the win before the international break. And yeah, for all the benefits of watching Scotland qualify for major tournaments consistently, it is going to be nice to get domestic football back and get back to sorry to borrow the cliche from footballers, but your bread and butter. So thank you for joining us, and we will see you again soon.
Cheers.